So I'm a financial audit director. I work as part of the UK Supreme Audit Institution, the National Audit Office. It's headed by the Controller and Auditor General. The Controller and Auditor General is appointed by the UK Parliament and is entirely independent of government. Our budget is determined by a cross-party commission of the Houses of Parliament, and therefore the CNAG is operationally and constitutionally completely independent of the government. His or her responsibility is to audit government accounts and also to report on the value for money or otherwise of government expenditure. I've been a public auditor for around 30 years. Started, if you can do the sums, back in the back towards the tail end of the 1980s, when our problems looked entirely different to the ones they look like now. What I'll briefly cover is a little bit about the Controller and Auditor General and the National Audit Office, of what I'm a part. I'll talk about the Department of Health and Social Care Group, because that's really important for setting the context in which we do our work and the sorts of problems that we're looking to solve and why we are looking increasingly towards data analytics to resolve them. And it's been really interesting to listen into colleagues' work on various aspects of data analytics more widely. So the Controller and Auditor General, as I said, appointed by a Parliament. The UK has a devolved system of government. Health and social care are matters that are devolved to the 4 constituent elements of the United Kingdom. So what I'm about to talk about holds good for England. I'm the auditor of the Department of Health and Social Care for England. There are different arrangements in place in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Each of those areas of the United Kingdom had their own Supreme Audit Institution, headed up by their own Auditor General. The National Audit Office and my boss, the UK's Controller and Auditor General, also picks up matters that are reserved to the UK government. So issues to do with defence, issues to do with a foreign policy, for example. They are matters that fall within our remit. We report publicly, we report through the Public Accounts Committee of the UK Parliament. That's a committee drawn from all parties in the UK Parliament. All parties have MPs represented in the Public Accounts Committee. It is chaired by an opposition member of Parliament, and that person is elected by the House of Commons. The NAO has a staff of around 800 people, based before March in London and in Newcastle. Newcastle is a city about halfway up the United Kingdom, just a bit south of Hadrian's Wall. In fact, Hadrian's Wall, this line of Hadrian's Wall passes very close to my office door in Newcastle, where I'm based. We're not civil servants. We report directly to the Controller and Auditor General, and as I said before, our budget is entirely independent of government. What does our financial audit comprise? It comprises things that you would expect. So we audit government accounts to a true and fair standard under international auditing standards. Those accounts are prepared essentially based on international financial reporting standards as amended by a financial reporting manual that's set by Her Majesty's Treasury. So the framework of authorities is broadly similar to those that colleagues will probably be familiar with. We also have to have regard to an issue which is not one that's faced by colleagues that work in a commercial sphere, in the corporate world. Because government budgets are voted by Parliament, they're determined by our UK Parliament, we have to have regard to an issue called regularity. We have to ask ourselves whether or not government has applied the money that Parliament's voted for it for the purposes that government intended. So that's an important distinguishing aspect of the work we do. When the Controller and Auditor General reports on accounts, he certifies and reports on a true and fair opinion, but he also talks to the regularity of the transactions that those accounts include. That wider remit also means that he has an ability to report on accounts, picking up issues that are of much wider significance but arise from the accounts. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment or two. Just for colleagues' information more widely, we also look at the value for money of government spending. I put a link in our chat box earlier on to the work that we have underway in relation to COVID-19. I was very struck by what colleagues were saying about kind of real-time reporting, real-time auditing around that. As a state audit institution and as a set of practitioners, we are doing that at the moment. We are combining factual reporting, so putting out into the public domain reports about what is happening, including a cost tracker for COVID. But we are also thinking about doing more evaluative work, which means that we will be concluding in reporting coming up over the horizon about the effectiveness and value for money of government spend. So please have a dip into that part of our website for our publicly available information. Final thing I'd say about our financial audit work, we are regulated on a voluntary basis by the UK's Financial Reporting Council. That means that we have to have proper regard, obviously as we would do, to the pronouncements of that institution and our duties as accounting professionals to comply with the relevant standards. So what does the Department of Health and Social Care group? As I say, it only covers England. I have put a link in here in this presentation, which I think Amir will be sharing around in due course, to the 18-19 accounts. What's the size and scope of the DHSC spend? It spends about 126 billion sterling each year of revenue. By a rough calculation, I reckon that's about 165 billion of US dollars, about 140 billion of euro every year, and it spends around 6 billion in terms of capital. The group is a complicated group. It consolidates around 450 bodies into the group. They range from small local hospitals that are consolidated by sub-consolidation through to major bits of infrastructure, including, for example, NHS, National Health Service Resolution. That's the bit of our system which holds the liability for clinical negligence. That's about 84 billion sterling of liability that's held in that particular organisation's accounts. There is a complexity to the group audit which flows from the fact that those local NHS organisations are audited by colleagues from the private sector. Those organisations can pick their own auditors. The National Audit Office sets a code of audit practice that they have to comply with. Procurement contracts require them to obviously comply with relevant standards, but those auditors are, as I say, picked by the local audit institutions, although they are part of my group audit effort and they operate under a set of group audit instructions which I issue. The overall issue, and I referred to this earlier on in relation to the budget setting process, is that the Department of Health and Social Care has been very close in the past to breaching the budget that Parliament set for it. That has serious consequences. That has to be rectified by a process in the House of Commons. It is incredibly embarrassing and difficult. So you may say, well, how close were they, Mike? In the year 2014-15, on a budget then of just over 100 billion, they came within 1.2 million of breaching that revenue control total. So very, very close indeed. Back in 15-16, the Controller and Auditor General reported on accounts. He reported on accounts because he was concerned about a series of aggressive accounting approaches, one-off, short-term in nature, that were designed, in his view, to enable the department to manage its spend within those parliamentary control totals. So if you think about the presumed risk in the engagement around the management override of controls, this is in the UK DHSC context, couched always in terms of their proximity to the control total that Parliament has set it. And that's how that particular engagement risk plays out, and that informs our approach to using data analytics. I won't talk to this chart. It's quite busy, but it gives you an impression of how the group comes together. There are 4 significant components. These are NHS resolution because of the clinical negligence provision. They are NHS England. NHS England organises the commissioning of healthcare in England. There is a split between the commissioning and the providing element of this work in England, a split which is increasingly being eroded, but that's a subject for another presentation, I think. The NHS England spends about 115 billion. The consolidated provider account, that brings together all the hospital accounts into a single statement that comprises about 150 what we call foundation trusts, they're independent hospitals, and around 74 trusts which are still run within the NHS system. And we obviously have the core department which kind of records the other activity. So it's quite a busy group. In terms of audit timetable, obviously accounts are prepared up to the end of March. Typically, we would complete our audit and report through Parliament before Parliament rises in mid-July each year. So that's a very intensive timetable, and you can imagine how difficult it is to structure the flow of assurances from auditors through to me as a parent auditor in order to be able to meet that timetable. Suffice it to say that we are still working on the 2019 accounts, 2019-20 accounts for perfectly obvious reasons, which I won't go into. So this sets the scene, hopefully, for the data analytics. We are increasingly interested in the opportunities that big data and data analytics provide us, both in terms of doing the bread and butter of the audit work, but also in terms of assurance flows and insights. So what do I mean by all of that? As part of our audit approach, we re-perform the consolidations of those clinical commissioning groups and foundation and NHS trusts. We do that in a way that's been designed by our data experts within the NAO. We apply a series of metrics to test how those consolidations work and whether or not they hold together and have integrity. In relation to the clinical negligence provision, we use auditors experts, so a set of actuaries that are expert in how to look at clinical negligence, because colleagues will be aware that a significant element of clinical negligence provision will relate to incidents that have happened but not actually been reported yet. So this is an area that's subject to very complex modelling and requires expert data analytics and expertise in order for me as the auditor, I'm not an actuary, in order for me to be able to kind of understand what's going on in that model. But more importantly, perhaps for the insight side of things, because the consolidation of the clinical commissioning groups and the NHS hospitals is now on a common basis, it gives us the opportunity to use analytics for 2 purposes. Firstly, to see what's going on in the system for our own assurance purposes, but also to increasingly provide insights into what's going on across the system for those charged with governance, so the audit committees at NHS England and the Department of Health and Social Care itself. We are also interested, obviously, as I spoke earlier on in the chat pane, around using data visualization to inform our audit approach and to provide insights to the clients. And we do that particularly in relation to journals, where there's significant manual intervention in the production of accounts. We're finding that using a tool like Tableau gives us a way into talking with audit committees about features of the journals database. So who is posting journals, when are those journals being posted, both in terms of when are they being posted during the day, in the working week, but also in the business cycle, for example. And that's taking us on into asking some more sophisticated questions about how financial expertise is being deployed across the system. I've got an example here about how we're using data analytics. Obviously, colleagues will know that and understand, I hope, that I need to respect client confidentiality. So this is just using illustrative data. So across a big consolidation, where we have some evidence of quite aggressive accounting policies being deployed, one of the interesting issues that we're interested in finding out more about and asking questions around is how accounting policies around useful economic lives are being used in given organizations. So this example here looks at a common category in relation to the accounts of hospitals. And it's asking some questions about, does it make sense for a common item in these accounts to have a useful economic life range ranging from around 30 years up to near 200 years? It begs some basic, interesting questions that those charged with governance and management ought to be asking themselves about what's going on in the system. And we use these across a range of account lines to understand what's going on when those accounts are being pulled together. And we'd be very happy to come back and talk in a bit more detail, if it would be helpful, around the journal analytic tool, for example. So what are we doing to take this forward? We've launched a new strategy which is absolutely explicit and upfront and has been signed off by the UK Parliament around in using enhanced data analytics. And that's why the work of colleagues here in academia is so interesting and valuable to us, which has financial audit at its heart. We're also investing in new audit technology to enable us to exploit that technology. And we think there is much, much more to come. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of a taster for what we're up to. As I said, I'm kind of an old hand in terms of a practitioner, and it's very interesting for me to be in a space with so many bright people, considerably brighter than me, talking about the latest developments in academia, which are no doubt coming my way very soon.